So these are free what is. I've gone for the plural what are, but free what is talks on very different topics in a way. I guess my only connection with the last talk was when I was listening. I'm a Welshman who's probably quite hard to measure in two of the slides there. So I'm going to talk about what are statistical eBooks, and some of this earlier work was done under the NCRM program and also the Digital Social Research program, and we have a current ESRC grant which covers the rest of it. There's a load of people get involved in these sorts of things, and also the British Academy has started funding us on a recent teaching eBooks grant. So what am I going to cover? I'm going to talk a little bit about what are eBooks, what are statistical eBooks, and then, as one often does in this, I'm going to focus more on my own research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Stature software package and some features in it to do with eBooks and workflows and some examples. And at the end, I'll talk about some other software that's out there that does similar sorts of things. Okay? So, well, what is an eBook? Well, there's a book and there's a computer, and if you push the two things together, you'll get one of these things. This is kind of an electronic book. And these days, in the US at least, more books are actually published online in electronic format than are distributed in hard copy in bookshops. Okay, I could say that's the end of my talk. I've told you what an ebook is. What's the advantage there? Well, this place brings me back because I was an undergraduate student here. I did all my degrees here actually in Bath. There used to be a swimming pool where we are actually standing. They built this building about 3 years ago. And for younger members of the audience, they might think, well, when I was an undergraduate, I used to have to traipse over to the library, which is halfway across that parade, and access journal articles that way. You'd photocopy them, or if you're really unlucky, they wouldn't even have the book you wanted. So you have to send off in the post to get your thing. And of course, these days we all sit at our desks and we say, well, let's just Google whatever we want to know about, and hey presto, there are articles and books, often in formats like PDF, at our fingertips. Of course, being in this different format, being electronic, and being accessed by a web browser, allows us to do other things with documents. Documents don't simply become collections of words and pictures in some ways. You can get embedding of sound files, of videos within your document, or maybe even hyperlinks to other sources of information. Okay. So if we're taking that into a statistical or mathematical context, what can we do? Well, of course, a statistical textbook is no different in terms of paper. I mean, it might have a few more equations when you come to create a PDF file. But the difference is we have to think about what enhancements can we do? What can we add? And so really, when I'm talking about statistical eBooks, I'm talking about combining the textbook with a statistical software package. That's the kind of thing to talk about. Okay. And there were some forerunners to this sort of work. So Mathematica, and another package called SageMath, were early adopters of this sort of technology. So I've just grabbed a couple of screenshots here. Basically, on the web, there would be things like sliders, and when you moved sliders, things would happen. And so you would have interactive content with inside a book. Okay. So the package I'm going to talk about, Stature, is a software package that we've developed at the Multi-Level Modelling Centre, which I run in Bristol, with some colleagues in computer science in Southampton. And really, it's a stats package, but it has an ebook interface, amongst other interfaces. So that's what I'm really going to talk about. It has its own estimation engine, so it can fit its own models. It uses a system of what we call templates. I'm going to have to give a couple of slides on Stature before I actually get into eBooks, just to give you a little bit of background. But it also allows interoperability with other software packages. So one of the ideas being that, well, if you want to learn different software packages and you want to move from one to the other, it would be great if there was a package that interoperated with both of them, so you could see how the syntax varied from package to package. So just to give you an example, here's a screenshot, very small font, of how you would set up a model in the Stature package, and I can blow that up to save your eyes. basically it runs in a web browser, so you can immediately see that where we'll be going on to eBooks in a minute. And this is one example of a template that fits a regression model. So you set in your inputs for running a regression model, away it goes, and what it does is it creates a collection of objects to do with the model. So here, for example, are some equations to say this is the model that you're fitting. Okay, and there are some results for the model in question. So basically, in the browser, you have a pull-down list of all the sorts of objects that might be created if you do a graph or you fit a statistical model. Okay. So that really is just like a standard stats package thrown into a web browser. Okay, and there are lots and lots of these things called templates. This one particularly fits a regression, but we'll have one which will draw a graph. They're very much like R packages or state of functions, state of procedures, etc. What about in eBooks? Well, we have different ways of using the Stature package. So what I showed you there was this tree interface. We have an interface called Deep, and this is our eBook interface, and in the end I'll come on to the Leaf interface as well. Okay, so here's the general idea with Stature. We have some data set we're interested in analysing. We have a template that does something to it. You'll be prompted for input. Basically, the package will then write out commands to perform the function. Okay. It may create syntax for different packages so that they can run the function. It may, as we saw earlier, create equations to show you what it's doing. It may even create lines of instructions. So if you were using a package next to it, you could follow if you were using a point-and-click package, you could follow the instructions. It will then go away and run that function either internally or possibly by calling another software package. And then it will produce some results, which may be numbers, tables, charts, etc. And it also may produce data sets, and so the whole process can start again. They'll go over there, and you can use some more functionality. So how do we use that in an ebook context? Well, this is just the ebook interface as it looks. There's nothing going on at the moment. And basically what we will do is we'll import an ebook. Okay, so they come in this zip file format. Okay, and basically this was written by one of my postdocs, this particular ebook. And this is an ebook which is just going to talk you through a particular data set and an analysis of it. So basically, you start reading the ebook. Let's go. And it looks a little bit like if you get some of these PDF readers that you get where you get this sort of collapsible content on the left, some pages on the top, and then text. I mean, here is the book, essentially. We started talking about what we're going to do, talking about a data set, etc. Of course, the concept of page varies and changes completely in an electronic format because this can go on and on forever. It doesn't have to fit on the screen. Okay. So we can work our way down through this book, and this particular book is talking about a particular data set to get people into doing statistical analysis. So we start off with a summary of the data set, and really there's nothing different from looking at a PDF at this point. And then we start saying, well, maybe we want to explore this data set. So the first thing we have is thrown into the middle of the book is a dialog box to do some plotting. Okay, so we can choose certain types of plots. Okay, we'll have a lot of pull-down lists for particular inputs. Once we've done the inputs, as you'll see on the left there, we'll say it's running an R script. Okay, you'll see that the text is so something that's going to happen, and eventually something happens, and into your book appears the graph that would appear in, say, the R package. Okay. The graph not shown because it's particularly useful statistically, but because it's kind of pretty in this context. But the idea there is that if you were reading this book and you wanted to do something else, a different sort of graph, you'd come back up, and the book is interactive. Okay, so depending on what you do depends on what you see. Okay, so what's happened behind the scenes? Well, somebody's had to write this ebook. So behind the scenes, we write the text for the ebook, and then we tell the software what particular template, okay, so what particular bit of stats we want to put in this region of the ebook. In this case, Richard has chosen a template that does graph drawing in R. That requires some inputs, and you saw them doing that. But the ebook author can also pre-specify some of the inputs. Okay, so we can get it so that it doesn't ask you for 50 different types of graphs. It maybe chooses one graph and you can choose a different variable from your list of variables. Okay. And that would be a bit like in this diagram, those arrows there for inputs, the red ones being chosen by the program and the blue ones waiting for user input. Okay. So moving on with this ebook, the next thing we're trying to do here is basically trying to explain, we're at the multi-level center, so trying to explain the difference between a multi-level model and a single-level model. So what we do is there's a whole lot of text, which you wouldn't have time to read here, and then we ask the user, well, let's do it in your context, let's choose your explanatory variables. We've chosen everything else for you for fitting these models. And when they do that, it puts up the equations, so you can see in an equation form what the two-level model looks like, what the one-level model looks like. And then it uses an MCMC algorithm, quite a complicated Statsy algorithm. So it creates a table here based on your inputs. Okay, so all of this text will change. So this is doing model comparison. There's this model comparison diagnostic called the DIC, which is used for MCMC. And so it tries to explain statistical concepts by using your particular example. Okay? And we can, in the middle of the text, embed numbers that will change depending on the context. So not only do we pre-specify all of the inputs and allow the user to specify some of them, but we can also specify where and what of the many outputs that maybe these templates create we actually show. So in certain circumstances, we may have an audience who are a bit equations phobic. So even though the template will create equations, we don't have to show them in the ebook. We can pick and choose what we show. Okay, so it's very flexible. We may, for example, be wanting to teach people how to do graph drawing in R. So rather than showing equations, we might just select the R script code. So here is an example, another page in an ebook, where we have the R script code at the bottom and the graph that it produces on the top. Okay, so if you're trying to learn R, you can just point and click here and it'll show you what you do. And a final example here, this is one for exploring this big data set. So we've got a huge list here of possible explanatory variables. The user can choose a selection of them. The software will fit a model, and we can get it to produce contextual text. Okay, so very crude bit of contextual text here. Basically, for this model, there's a series of explanatory variables, and for each one we've got a coefficient and its standard error, and if the coefficient is twice as big as its standard error, we've got the ebook spitting out that this is significant. If it's not significant. Just as a proof of context, but we can get it to do this kind of conditional text. Okay. So basically this system is built on the flexible data analytical engine within Stature. It allows you to embed inputs and outputs within contextual information, and it can be tailored to your own particular use. It could be a log or a recording tool as well. Okay. So what are the benefits? Well, we see that the use of this that could be used for teaching quantitative research methods. Okay, in particular, how you might interoperate with different software packages. You could use it for communicating principles, theories, etc. For reports, you can imagine having these ebooks where you get a new year's worth of data, and you could filter through just following the operations. And we can So sometimes some of the functions in software packages have so many different inputs, we can pre-specify to make a sort of a simpler version for people to use. Okay. So moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit about our current research grant, which funds one postdoc, Richard Parker, who's not in the audience but is at the festival, who's with me in Bristol, and Daniel Michaelidis, who's a programmer in Southampton. And we have 5 different work packages within this grant. It's kind of a follow-on grant in that we're trying to use the system a bit more to expand the eBook functionality. And I'm particularly going to talk about work package 3 here, the Statistical Analysis Assistant. So this is a kind of interesting idea, and we've heard talks about data science and getting machine learners involved in social science research. So the idea here, what is a statistical analysis system? Well, the idea being that computers already are used to assist us with our statistical analysis. Okay, none of us would do a linear regression by hand using a hand calculator these days. So we've accepted that. But how much of the process can the computer actually do, and how much requires human input? Okay, so the opinion, you could say, is divided here. You could imagine that some people might like it that you could just pour your data set into the top of the computer, and out pops your report of the best analysis. And there are projects out there as well. There's the automatic statistician, which Zubin Gamaranian in Cambridge has got. So there are people thinking about these sorts of things. And machine learning can be a little bit like that, trying to find features from a data set. Unsupervised learning is a little bit like that. Of course, other people work at the other end of the scale and say, well, you have to do it all yourself. You can't let the computer do this stuff. Okay, so we've started work in this area, and here's an analysis system we'd all be happy with. Okay, so it's basically just a screen which says, do you have a research question? Do you have a population? Okay, now go and ask a statistician. Okay. We could take that one step further. Okay, this is the chi-squared edition. So do you have a research question? Do you have a population? Is in actual fact your research question something that will need a chi-squared test? Okay, then go on to page 2, and we have functionality here to do a chi-squared test. So you basically put in your categorical variables, and it will do your chi-squared test, but it will also show you all the steps, so it will work its way through looking at expected counts, and even at the end, it will talk you through things like degrees of freedom and get the test right at the end. Okay. So we could take this one step further. I don't know how many people in the room are of the same vintage as me. There were in the 80s a genre of interactive books called The Warlock of Five Top Mountains, the first of them. And really these were books designed for kids, school kids, primary school kids. And essentially, you'd read through the book, and each page there would be something like what's written there, the goblin advances towards you, blah, blah, blah. And so that you didn't cheat, they would basically move you to, if you want to do this thing, move to this page, which is a long way from where you are at the moment, etc., etc. And essentially, what these authors had done in a kind of different context is they'd made a book that was effectively a flowchart. Okay? So by disguising the random page movements, you didn't really see so much the flowchart structure. But there's a flowchart with various endings. In this case, 99% of them involved you dying and having to start to read the book from scratch again. Okay. Well, we could do something similar in statistics, and there are examples of this. There are textbooks out there which will, at least for very basic tests, you can ask a few questions like how many variables do you have, what types of variables, are normality assumptions appropriate, and such a flowchart would then lead you through to the appropriate test. Okay. And you can expand this idea by including branches that didn't have material written yet. And these would be the kind of the branch which says, well, you've got to this stage, we'll go and ask a statistician. And that does sound a bit churlish, but at least you could tell the statistician what you'd answered the questions. Okay, so I don't know how many of you in the room, if any of you ever do stats consulting, but it's an interesting process, but it works a little bit like this. Okay, so in some ways, the equivalent of end up dead is having to go and ask a statistician. Okay, so where might this go? Well, if the system was flexible enough, then we could create statistical analysis systems that were tailored to each statistician. So we don't all agree on something. There is this popular saying that if you have a question, you ask 10 statisticians for a solution, you get 10 different answers. And we do things slightly differently. So you could imagine tailoring your ebook to that. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to speed along. I'm going to quickly tell you a little bit about related work with what we call our Leaf workflow system. And this is an extension to this work on eBooks, to something called workflows. Well, I'll give you a few examples in the end. Okay, so we're using something called Blockly. Now, Blockly is developed by Google, and if any of you have got kids who are probably going to secondary school age, the way that they learn how to do computer programming these days is there's something called Scratch, which looks a little bit like this. It's kind of visual programming. So you can see that computer operations are basically shown as coloured blocks. Okay. So here is an example of such a coloured blocks. Here is an example of a workflow for doing a histogram. Okay. So basically, we have a start block at the top. We select a data set. We set some inputs. We call the histogram, and we show the histogram. And if you run that in this Leaf system, hey presto, there's your histogram. And you can do more complicated things. You can string together series of operations. And we're going to use this system in a way to underpin the eBooks that we're writing. Okay, so the system allows you to string operations together. We have created blocks which this is a block which explains a little bit about MCMC. So you get blocks of text with the numbers that have come from your analysis embedded in there, and conditional text that tell you what they actually mean. Okay. The system is quite flexible. You can have blocks to ask questions. You can collapse blocks, because otherwise it gets very, very big on the screen. And you can use variables, so you can create lists. You can do all sorts of things. So some fairly straightforward programming operations. So you can also do things like conditional operations. So higher up in this workflow, we're fitting a model. The model can have a normal response, a binomial response, or a Poisson response. And when we come to do the predictions, we generally want to transform the predictions if we've got binomial. So all we have here is an if statement, and we actually create we create the predictions on the probability scale for binomials, on the log scale for Poisson, etc. So there, for example, is the output on the probability scale. So that's just really an example. Just to finish up, because I saw the 2 minutes slide, there are lots of other systems that do ebook type work. So one system is Shiny, within R. It works only within R. And here's just their web page. So Shiny has lots of sliders and boxes you can use to change your drawings. We've actually used Shiny, or at least my colleagues have used Shiny, on a website, basically to show some of the work of a project, looking at uncertainty, communicating uncertainty to other people. Okay, and so this website talks about school league tables, which is George Becky's area, and these things will change as you go. So they're interactive ebooks. There are other systems out there. There's something called IPython Jupyter, which is another alternative system. And I haven't got anything else to say about it, but just to show that we're not the only people doing this sort of work. As a last slide, we've actually released a new version of Stature only last week, I think it is. I don't even know if we've actually got an official announcement there. So if you are interested in discovering or playing around with any of the stuff I've shown you software-wise today, then just follow the website here. If you're a UK academic, you can download any of our software for free. So that's it. And are there any questions? Thank you for listening.